Welcome back to another episode of the North Star Takes podcast. I'm Bailey Paulicki. He's Jacob Liberta. We're a Minnesota sports podcast, and you can find all our videos here on our YouTube channel. So please hit that subscribe button and do not miss out on any of our Minnesota sports videos. And if you're a Vikings fan, give this video a like because the offseason is just getting rolling here. It's combine week finally. Some exciting rumors are about to be swirling as we're used to this during this week, combine season. And today we're going to be talking some non-Kirk Cousins Vikings talkers. We just did a Kirk Cousins video all about him. So we're going to talk about some of the other guys on this team that they have to make decisions on. And so we're just going to basically be talking about what should the Minnesota Vikings do with some of their key veterans. And without a further ado, Liberta, let's start off with probably the biggest one on here, Danielle Hunter. I think he's only played like 7 games the last couple seasons. Obviously, he had that season-ending neck injury where he never played in 2020, and then tore his pec in 2021, that Dallas Cowboys Sunday Night Football game, and he was out for the season after that. And he's got kind of a contract situation coming up. They kind of have to decide what to do with him. I believe he's due a huge roster bonus if he's on the roster like the third day of the league year or something this coming year. So what are your thoughts on Danielle Hunter? Do you think they should keep him or trade him? He's probably not a likely cut candidate just based on his contract structure. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and plus he's also got to have some trade value, just being that he's the youngest player ever, quickest player ever. I forgot how it's phrased exactly to get to 50 sacks in an NFL career. So that's worth noting. And I know he's only played 6 games over the last 2 seasons, so that's certainly a hindrance to his value. But still, I think he'd be worth something to somebody. But looking at his overall really body of work, it looks great. I know what have you done for me lately? That doesn't look good. But if you really think he can get back to being healthy over a full season again, I mean, you got to feel like he's due now, right? I mean, after 2 years, we've just been banged up. As long as he can come back from this torn pec, which is no easy thing. I know that's certainly weighed on other players. If you look around the league, the people who have had similar injuries, like for instance on our own team, Anthony Barr, like that took a while to come back from.
Right.
Like Barr was out week 2 of 2020, and then he didn't even come back until 5 weeks into this past season. So like that took a while, and like he didn't even feel like he was. I mean, he has some other issues, but he didn't feel like he was fully up to speed like for a while. So I think that's no joke. And obviously he's already got the neck injury history, so that's worth being concerned about. But at the same time, I feel like Hunter is a guy I still lean towards keeping. I know he's got that $26 million cap hit coming if we keep him on the roster that third day of the league year. But I just feel like he's such a special talent that he's just that one of those edge rushers. It's the premier position on the football roster towards winning a championship. And I still think he's got plenty of gas in the tank, plenty of years in front of him. I think he can age well into his 30s. And I would be really sad to let him go just because I think he could go off for some team and have a 20-sack season. And I'd like to see him in this new multiple D front with Ed Donatel and this new regime. And I know he mentioned we'll play a little bit 3-4, maybe some 4-3 concepts. And Hunter can kind of do it all just because he's a ridiculous athlete with crazy intangibles. But I think at this point, I'm leaning towards keeping him. I think the production can still be there. He's got to be due for a healthy season eventually. And I think this has got to be it. And it's kind of the same argument. I know it's not completely apples to apples, but it's the same argument that I make for Byron Buxton and the Twins, just because I think he's such a special talent. You just don't find growing on trees everywhere. So I would really love to find a way to keep him in town. I think we can lower his cap hit too by extending him out because he's only on a contract now for the next 2 years. So for 2022 and 2023. So we can extend him out, push that cap hit down a little bit, and create some relief that way for a player you want to keep around that long anyways. So I think that's kind of where I stand on Hunter. How are you feeling about it, Bailey?
Yeah, I think if Kirk Cousins and his contract are gone, then for sure, I think you have to keep Danielle Hunter around because, like you said, he's that special of a player. You know, up until these last 2 seasons, he had no injury issues to speak of. Yeah. So, I mean, I think he's just had some dumb luck given the injuries that he's had. I mean, that neck injury obviously is just something fluky that happened in practice at training camp. And then the torn pec, I mean, obviously you can't really control that. It's not like that's a muscle strength issue with Danielle Hunter. The dude's absolutely ripped. So, I feel like he's due for another bounce back, huge season. And he looked really good in the 7 games he played this last season. Yeah, he looked like he was his old self. So I would keep him around. He's only 27 years old. Like you said, you could extend him, push that cap hit down. And if Kirk Cousins is gone, then Danielle Hunter's probably your biggest cap hit on the team, even with an extension still. but he's also at an extremely important position at edge defense, edge rusher. So, and then this is a loaded edge class as well. And so you could draft another defensive end, whether it's the first round, second round, whatever, to pair with him, because we could, we need another starting defensive end on this team. And you could have another dynamic duo at defensive end again. And I think that's something that this, granted it's going to be a 3-4 and a 4-3. So they'll be mixing and matching a little bit. Maybe it won't be as much of a need as what we've seen in the past, but I agree. Danielle Hunter's a really special player, and he's one of the fan favorites, I think. I mean, he's probably the best overall player on the defense. So
for sure.
It's either him or Eric Kendricks probably. So I think keeping him around would be smart. And because, like you said, it's hard to come across elite edge rushers, and we have one ourselves. So if you can keep him around and give him a decent contract that he's happy with to keep him happy, I think that'll be, super important going forward for a team that's kind of trying to retool here on the fly. So let's move into another core piece of this defense, especially under the Mike Zimmer era. Harrison Smith, he's getting up there in age a little bit. He's obviously still one of the better safeties in the league. He's probably not in the top, 3 or 4 anymore, but he's still up there. He still plays well. What are your thoughts on Harrison Smith? Obviously, he's got a massive contract now for 3 or 4 more seasons yet. So, what are your thoughts on Harrison Smith, and if he's a trade candidate for the Vikings?
Yeah, I think he's definitely a trade candidate. I think the first thing they should do is probably just try and renegotiate, see if they can move money around to create more cap space and not have to fully just cut him. Just because I think he's still a valuable player to a team, just because he's clearly a seasoned veteran. He's had a great career to this point, and he feels like a guy you'd want to be a lifetime Viking. But at the same time, he could be a cap casualty in one of those tough decisions you got to make moving on from the previous regime. So it's really tough making this call. And at the same time, like, cutting him wouldn't really make a ton of financial sense either, just because you'd incur, I think his cap hit this year's $13 million and his dead cap's a little over $7 million. So you'd save $6 million. But at the same time, I don't know, because it's not just this year either. He's got a contract all the way through 2025 because he's a Rick and Zim guy, so they signed him for 4 more years last year. But he had $7 million dead cap this year, another $5 million next year, another $3 million a couple of years from now, even another $2 million in 2025. So, like, there's a lot of dead cap you're kicking around there by paying a guy to not be on the team. So I don't know, that caused me a little hesitation, but it's very possible there's a trade partner out there somewhere that would entertain this. A team that's really close to win a championship, or maybe already has recently and wants to win another, and they just feel like they need to plug a hole somewhere, and they have a little bit of financial room to bring in really a leader of a defense and some guy they know is going to play the position well. So I think I'd probably either keep him or trade him. I don't think I want to cut him at this point, but I think that's probably where I stand, really. This could change too. I don't know. This might be the toughest one, in my opinion, on the roster. But.
Yeah, I would agree with you, just because he's one of those guys that should be a lifelong Viking, retire a Viking, be in the Ring of Honor, hopefully the Hall of Fame, all that stuff. But yeah, I think his contract is ridiculous the way it's structured for the next few seasons.
Yes,
and yeah, it would be great if he'd be willing to renegotiate that contract and bring his numbers down and all that stuff, but I don't know if I see that happening a year after he signs that extension. So, I mean, safety is the one position where I don't mind having an older player back there, because we've seen it before in the NFL. Guys, Ed Reed played safety until he was almost 40 years old. So, I mean, guys have done it, and he's a super smart player, and, he only makes everyone else around him better. And he makes up for a lot of the deficiencies that we've seen on this defense the last couple seasons, both him and Eric Kendricks.
Exactly.
So I'd love to keep him around, but I think the way his current contract is set up is just ridiculous. So if they can get that restructured, that'd be great, or renegotiated, however they want to do it. But otherwise, I think it makes sense to trade him, because at least you get some compensation for him. There would be a team that'd be willing to take him, I'd imagine. There's teams that could use really, a lot of back end help, and he's still a, good safety that could make a difference on a contending team. So cutting him doesn't make sense, just given all the dead cap you'd accrue over the next few seasons. And you're trying to help your cap situation here, not hurt it even more. So I know you want to clean some of this out, but at the same time, taking out a bunch of dead cap is not exactly the way to do it. So I'd prefer to keep him, but if you have to, then trade him. I wouldn't feel as bad about letting him go as Danielle Hunter. I'll just say that much.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with that just because I think Hunter's got a lot more years in front of him than Smith does.
Absolutely. So let's move on to a guy who's actually technically free agent right now, Anthony Barr. He's not under contract with the Vikings, but Kevin O'Connell did mention his name in his opening press conference about guys, that he sees as a fit in this 3-4 defense. And, Anthony Barr was a 3-4 outside linebacker at LSU, or not LSU, UCLA.
There you go. Yeah.
And so, I mean, what are your thoughts there on potentially bringing Barr back on the cheap? We thought he was probably gone after this season, but there's still a chance. It seems like every time he's so close to going away, they find a way to maybe bring him back. So do you think it's possible, and would you do it?
Yeah, I think it's very possible, and you know me, I'm a Barr guy. I got Barr's jersey. I think Barr would be a great guy to bring back in the mix. But at the same time, I totally understand if you wouldn't want to, just because he's the prototypical Zim guy. Because I mean, he was literally Zim's first draft pick, so like I could see why you wouldn't want that in the building. But at the same time, I'd be really genuinely curious to see what he looks like in a 3-4 base defense, just because I think that's naturally what his skill set would play better in. Really, I think people have said that all along. So I'd be really curious to know how a guy like Ed Donatel or Mike Pettin in that defensive room would want to use him, just because I think there's been a lot of untapped potential or maybe pass rushing prowess hidden in there that we just never unlocked in our 4-3 defense. So I'd probably be good either way on this. If we sign it back to a reasonable deal, I'm good with bringing it back for another year, just because, I mean, who else do we have at linebacker right now that really can play right away, especially in a changing defense? That doesn't really make me feel good. So I'd be good with bringing him back on a really minimum deal, and not totally vet minimum, but like pretty close to it, maybe a few $1 million more than that. But just because I think we could just push the head linebacker issue down, push it back another year while maybe we draft another one. I know it feels like we've drafted a lot of linebackers in middle rounds lately, but maybe you could draft another one this year that you feel it could be the heir apparent there. But I could go either way on this one. I'm not too definitive one way or another, but if I had to pick one, I'd probably lean more towards bringing it back on a reasonable deal.
You're telling me you don't like Chaz Surratt standing up on the other edge of Danielle Hunter?
Oh yeah, totally. I know Chaz Surratt, man, that just gets me excited.
I'm with you though. Like, I would bring Barr back on the absolute cheap just because we have nothing else at linebacker. Obviously, he had a knee injury this season that was kind of just a reoccurring issue that, who knows if that's ever going to get better. And he's, into his 30s now too. So he's definitely not young anymore by any means, but smart player. Obviously plays well with Eric Kendricks, which is important, I think. And yeah, I think, it'd be interesting to see him in a 3-4 scheme, maybe get more edge rushing opportunities, which I think, I always thought he'd be good at that, but Zimmer, for some reason, never used him in that type of a role. So, I would absolutely bring him back for cheap, but at the same time would completely understand if they didn't do that and just kind of moved on and looked for other options at linebacker, because there's probably other decent free agent linebacker options out there for a 3-4 scheme, and that could play multiple too, 3-4 and 4-3. So I'm sure they're looking for some flexibility there as well. But go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, fan favorite, but doesn't necessarily mean anything when it comes to this stuff with the new regime.
Yeah, I was just going to add real quick too. I know, for what it's worth, I know you pay these guys for their production on the field, but at the same time, I mean, he was the Walter Payton Man of the Year candidate for the Vikings for what that's worth, and there's a lot of good things in the community, a lot of highly respected guy in the locker room, and I think he's a natural leader. So it kind of depends how he fits with O'Connell, really, too. So
yeah, that's a good point. Let's move on to Michael Pierce, which this one might shock some people because he opted out last season due to COVID, and then this past season he had some injury issues. He was in and out of the lineup. He had a pretty bad elbow injury from what it sounds like, some severe ligament damage that he was going to need surgery on. When he was in there, he was a pretty good player. I mean, he was pretty stout up the middle. He actually was a better pass rusher than I think people were expecting. The run defense obviously was not great this year, and which is surprising because we had two nose tackles on this roster with Pierce and Dalvin Tomlinson. Yeah. In a 3-4, do you think that changes at all? Do you think that would maybe want them to keep Pierce around, or do you think having both him and Tomlinson's just a little too redundant?
I feel like having him and Tomlinson's a little bit too redundant. I know Pierce is definitely a natural nose tackle in a 3-4. I think he'd fit seamlessly into it. Yeah. But I don't know if we need two of them. I don't know if you play both of them that often. So I don't know if this is necessary. I mean, granted, they come with pretty high cap hits is the problem. So like you could use them as rotation players, basically keep a fresh guy on the field at all times. But I don't know if you
Yep.
have that luxury with our cap situation the way it is. So you probably got to pick one or the other. And just thinking about it financially, we're really up against it right now. Tomlinson does not have a contract that's friendly towards cutting. So
Mm-hmm.
I think Pierce would be the guy just because he's scheduled to make a little over $10 million this year, and his dead cap, if you cut him, would only be about 4, where Tomlinson would be drastically more, around a $10 million dead cap. So, that's not realistic. So, that's not happening. So, if you can pick one of the others, it's going to be Tomlinson, even though Pierce, he might be a better player, better fit for your defense. I still think he'd be the guy. So, it really depends, too, how you envision this defensive line really shaping up as far as this transition to a new defense goes.
Yeah, I think if it was just the player versus player, I'd probably keep Pierce over Tomlinson.
Exactly.
But when you lay out their contracts like that, and it costs you way less to cut Pierce, then I think that's probably the move, because you got a guy like Armon Watts who's shown he can play. You know, whether or not he's actually a nose tackle is probably up for debate, but in a 3-4, he could play one of the outside defensive line spots too. So,
sure.
Yeah, I don't think there's a need for both of them, and I'm sure, you know, at some point we'll draft another nose tackle type player that can truly develop in that role.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think it's necessary to have both of them. I'd be totally fine cutting Michael Pierce, as great of a guy as he seems to be, and he's a fun interview and all that stuff.
For sure.
You know, it's been a bummer that it hasn't really worked out to this point, but I mean, maybe we'll be surprised and maybe they'll find a way to keep him around, but
maybe.
I wouldn't be too heartbroken if he ends up leaving. So probably not a trade candidate either. I'd imagine he wouldn't have a ton of trade value at this point. So it sucks, but it is what it is.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Well, let's move on to Patrick Peterson, who he wasn't bad by any means this last season. I mean, he was pretty steady, you know, at outside corner, kind of held down that number 1 corner spot. Didn't do anything super flashy. He had 1 interception, which is in the last game of the season.
Yeah.
Wasn't that a pick 6 too?
It was a pick 6, yeah. A falling Andy Dalton on 4th down.
Yeah, exactly. So what are your thoughts on Patrick Peterson? Obviously, he's another year older. I think he's 31, 32 years old now. What are your thoughts on potentially bringing him back to just kind of restabilize that cornerback room?
You know, I'm all for it. I know PFF didn't love the season he had last year, but I personally did. I feel like he wasn't targeted that often, so obviously he was playing decent in comparison to our other corners at least. So
Yep.
I'm definitely down for that. Plus, if we don't bring him back, who's filling out this cornerback room? And I think Patrick Peterson's another good personality to have in the locker room. I don't know, just again, it's another one that depends on his fit with Kevin O'Connell, how much he'd buy into that, or buying into playing in this new defense. Because he definitely, I think he came here because of Zim. So now that Zim's out of the picture, how much would he embrace this new defense? I don't really know for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally be open to it, but not on the contract number that he was at last year. I don't think he's worth $10 million. No. So I'd bring him back for probably 5, 6 or something, about half that. So I think he'd be a nice veteran presence to have to, I don't know, stabilize that cornerback room at least for another year. But at the same time, another guy, I won't be heartbroken moving on from him, but he's kind of a fun guy to have on the team. But I don't know if that's necessarily the player right now. So
exactly. I think it kind of depends. I mean, obviously you have to make this decision before the draft, but you know, if we're going to take like a Sauce Gardner in the first round, then I don't really care about having Patrick Peterson, because then
that's true.
You'll have Gardner, you'll have Cam Dantzler, and then I'll be interested to see how the rest of that cornerback room shakes out, because Mac Alexander was pretty rough last year. Obviously, Breland will not be back.
We need a new nickel corner.
Yeah, nickel corner's, a tough spot, and that could potentially be another free agent signing. So that'll be interesting to see how they fill out the rest of that corner room. Chris Boyd is garbage. That dude cannot play corner in the NFL.
Yeah, he can play on special teams, but that's fine.
Yeah, that's about it. But so yeah, it'd be interesting. I mean, maybe he'd sign on as a depth piece, even if we did draft a Sauce Gardner or something, and he was just a rotational outside corner or something. But I kind of have a hard time seeing him settle for something like that.
Oh yeah.
So I agree with you. I'd bring him back on a very reasonable 1-year deal. But at the same time, it just makes a ton of sense that he wouldn't come back, given that Zimmer's not here. We're probably not going to pay him what he wants. And
we're not really contending this year either.
No.
As much as people out there want to say we are, no, we're not.
Yeah. The defense is going to be a work in progress regardless. So, it doesn't make a ton of sense to bring him back when the defense is probably going to be bad again this upcoming season. It's, you're going to have a lot of young players probably on that side of the ball. So before we wrap up here, are there any other potential surprises that you could see the Vikings moving on from? This could include Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen. I know some people are talking about Eric Kendricks, which I don't find super realistic, but what are your thoughts on some of those guys?
Yeah, I'd say those are the biggest names that we haven't already talked about. I don't know. I think you could entertain those in some regard, but none of those really make a ton of sense just because it's like Kendricks is the center of our defense. I mean, both literally and figuratively, just
Yep.
because he's a natural born leader. And I think he's exactly what we need to galvanize this new group into this a new era. So
Yep.
I would like to have him back. And with like Thielen, that would be I think, a very risky choice by Kwesi to move on from him just because he's, Minnesota's boy, being the
Yep.
hometown kid going from Detroit Lakes. Everybody knows the story. Going to Mankato, getting on here getting on the Vikings from a rookie minicamp tryout. I mean, he's got a good career going, but at the same time, I think he's still got some production in him, and
Hmm.
I think it probably wouldn't sit well with the fans right away if this was one of the first moves he made. And
Yeah.
then for Dalvin, contractually, it would make a ton of sense to move on from this year just because the cap savings would be so little that it wouldn't really be worth it. So you might as well bring him back for another year, see what he's got, see how he'd fit into Kevin O'Connell's new offense.
Yeah. Dalvin, I would only trade him if you got a good draft pick in return. Like first, second round pick, I'd probably do it.
Yeah.
Adam Thielen, it's like, I'm sure he wouldn't have a ton of trade value at this point in his career. He's, in his early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And he's another guy too, like he seems like he could fit into that Larry Fitzgerald role where he can play into his mid 30s because, he's just a good possession receiver. He can run all the routes. He's smart.
Great
So like,
red zone.
yeah, exactly. He's a huge red zone threat. So I could see him playing for a couple more years yet, at least. Obviously his contract is an issue, but I think I saw there was a clip of him basically discussing that he thinks the Vikings are going to come to him about reworking his contract. So maybe he's already open to that possibility. Maybe with the new leadership in place, he's just he's more excited about the team and he's be more willing to do something like that. So,
Sure.
And Eric Kendricks, I wouldn't touch him. I mean, I know he's got a decently high cap hit, but I mean, he's also the best player on the defense currently. It's either him or Danielle Hunter, however you want to slice it. But,
Yep.
Yeah, just in terms of leadership and being, I could see him being a team captain this upcoming season once some of these other people move on. So,
totally agree.
Yeah, I would keep Eric Kendricks around for sure. But it's kind of fun to speculate because some of these guys will definitely be back, but some of them won't be, and it's just hard to know who exactly will be here and won't be here. But a month from now, we'll have a really good idea of what this roster is going to look like pre-draft.
Yes, for sure. I know. Just because there's no track record with Kwesi and O'Connell, you have no idea what they like and what they don't like, and how these guys will gel with them that are already on the roster or who won't. So, yeah, I have no idea. I mean, these conversations are probably all happening behind closed doors right now as far as who wants to buy into this and who doesn't want to stick around for this. So, like you said, it's going to be in quick succession. It's going to be soon enough, and then we'll have an idea what this team's going to look like pre-draft, and then after the draft, we'll kind of have an idea who we're looking at starting really for week 1 of the 2022 season already.
Absolutely. So that's going to do it for this edition of the North Star Takes podcast. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're a Minnesota sports fan, please hit the like button on this video and give us a subscribe as well. Feel free to follow us on both Twitter and Instagram and leave your comments below. Who would you keep? Who would you trade? Who would you potentially cut out of all these names we listed? And if we missed anybody, please let us know and add their name in as well. Until next time, thanks for watching.